You know that feeling when you fire up After Effects, you drop in some cool fire elements and then you're ready for it to look good, but it looks terrible. Well, here's 5 tips for you to level up your fire VFX quick. Alright, so let's start with something very obvious, and that is the glow. Once you add your fire elements, you obviously want to apply your glow effects. However, it can take a super long time for you to kind of nail that perfect glow settings. And of course, it also depends on so many things. For example, is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Is it exterior? Is it interior? Is it a real looking fire, or is it like the Hollywood type looking fire? How do you want the audience to feel? Is it dramatic, or is it more of a light-hearted scene? What's really important is to use at least 3 variations of glow on top of your elements. This is what I would recommend, and I think it works around 95% of the time. Plus, I think you should be able to apply these settings in whatever composing software you're using. Alright, so let's start by adding your first glow effect, and we're going to change the threshold to something very tight. And by tight, I mean we're going to target only the highlights of the fire. And it's typically between 45 and 65 that I said the first glow effect. And then with the radius, you also want to do something very low. I usually do between 25 and 45 because you don't want that first glow to spread very far. Now we're going to duplicate that glow effect, and we're actually going to lower the threshold to something smaller, even just by a small amount, but going to increase the radius to something quite high, maybe between 250 and 350. And lastly, we're going to duplicate the glow effect again, and this is the one that's going to give the extra spice to your glow effect, because this is the one that's going to kind of blend in your elements better and also going to wrap around your foreground objects. And in this one, we're going to increase the threshold to something bigger, maybe around 75, and we're going to increase the radius to something incredibly big, between 650 and 850, I would say. Now this is a before and after. Using this glow effect, you can see how much it wraps around the edges and kind of just spills the light on top of our foreground objects. And about the glow intensity for each of the glow effects, you kind of have to adjust it accordingly, because it really depends on your clip and also depends on a lot of other things. For example, do you have something in the foreground of your fire, because that's also going to change how your glow behaves. And also when you add your smoke elements, that's also going to change how your glow kind of looks. So you want to make sure that you kind of do the glow whilst you're doing the compositing, which might be a little bit strange, but I feel like this might be the best workflow to create these fire sequences. Alright, here's an example of 2, I think, pretty similar shots, at least the way they were composited. However, you can see how different these settings are for the glow effects. And that is because you can see in the forest fire shot, we have a lot of these foreground objects that would cover the fire behind them. And that actually changes the way our glow looks and behaves, like I said before. And that way you kind of have to adjust your glow settings so it kind of fits with that shot. Where with the other shot, with the firefighter, you can see our fire is much more exposed to the camera. We have to change our glow settings accordingly. I can show you, if we just apply the same glow settings, what our glow in the shot with the firefighter would look like. And as you can see, it looks pretty terrible and overblown. Alright, so tip number 2 is smoke. And again, that's a pretty obvious one, because you are going to add smoke if you add fire, because they just don't work without each other. But let's take a look at an example to kind of showcase this a little bit better. So typically you would kind of want to add smoke to the foreground and the background, because obviously you're going to be compositing in 2D or 2.5D, like in my case with this particular shot. And as you can see, our character is running through this scene where there's a lot of fire around them. And also you want to make sure that you layer smoke elements, because you want to create a depth in your scene. So especially if it's 2.5D, you can also move these elements to kind of be further in Z space. So with this one, as you can see, I have my smoke elements in the background and they are pushed back quite a bit in the Z space. And I also have my foreground smoke elements where I actually move them quite close to the camera, but just about enough so when they go through Z space, it's not going to be past that point. And as you can see, we have a third type of smoke element which doesn't always work, but in this case it worked quite well, because I wanted to get the illusion of our character running into a denser smoke area, which all I did was I put it on the foreground and I just faded it in very slowly. So it's not very sudden, very slowly. You just fade it in and it looks like he's running into a more denser smoke area. You also want to make sure that you use variations of colors, and I typically start with the bottom smoke layer to be a bright orange, and then as I have the different layers on top of it, I usually change them to something either darker orange or darker red. And that also creates just more depth because it looks like there's more types of smoke emitting from these sides or from wherever they're emitting from. And tip number 3 is fire embers. And actually fire embers are very essential, but a lot of people actually forget to composite them. But they can add so much drama and kind of movement to your fire scenes. It is very important to layer them up, and with our pack that we offer, we have 4 options for you to kind of grab. We have 60 frames per second for slow motion shots. We have wide shots, mid shots, and close-ups of fire embers. And that's very important because let's look at this example of, again, this firefighter running through the scene. We have wide fire embers in the background in front of our firefighter where he's, running towards, and you can see they are much smaller and less noticeable. And then in the middle, kind of in front of him and behind him, we have our mid fire embers, and closer to the camera we have our close-up fire embers. And you just want to create, again, that kind of depth, that kind of 3D depth, so it creates a more realistic scene. Tip number 4 is motivation and placement. So you're most likely going to be working with a narrative piece where it's already kind of thought out where and why there is a fire in the first place. However, you might have to dig a little bit deeper for it to kind of make sense visually when you kind of compositing. I usually like to create a small story of why the fire is at where it is at the time is being shown. So, where did it come from? Why did it happen? Or how wild should it be? Is it like because an evil character just dropped some fire and the room is full of fire and there's this one character who's like super scared? Is it a scene where our firefighter is running through the fiery scene and you want to make it very dramatic? You just want to make sure that the amount of fire as well kind of can motivate whatever the script kind of holds. In terms of placement for the fire elements, it's actually kind of the reason why we have so many different packs for fire elements, because there are so many different locations where you could place these fire elements, and you want to make sure that you place them accordingly of what they are, because otherwise they can look out of place. For example, let's say we have fire on the ground, we would of course composite some large ground fire elements. But if let's say it's on a wall or it's on a ceiling or there's fire coming out from the windows, you just want to make sure that you use the right type of fire, because otherwise they can look very out of place. And the last tip that I have for you today is tip number 5, and that is color correction. Firstly, you want to make sure that the fire elements kind of match your scene in terms of color, and that also determines how your glow is going to look. In terms of coloring, we took a very long time to figure out the best coloring for our elements, and that is why you can actually just drop a glow effect onto it and it's going to look good. And what's also good is that we use the same coloring method for all of our elements. So when you apply the glow effect and you're using our elements, it's going to match for the whole scene. Also about the exposure for your fire elements, you want to make sure that it matches your clip's exposure. For example, if your clip has its highlights blown out, you want to make sure that your fire before your glow actually matches the exposure of your clip, because otherwise you're going to have a harder time when working with the glow. So depending on your shot or what project you're working on, you're typically going to be working with log footage, and you're going to have to color correct it according to your footage. And color correcting generally means your contrast and saturation, your coloring. However, even after compositing, once you finish, I highly recommend that you add a lot or just a very small color correction. Make sure that the fire and the glow looks still good, even once applied a very basic color correction, because that also determines how your end results are going to look. And you want to make sure when it gets to the colorist, your fire is going to look banging. Always double check on that. Alright, so that was the 5 tips to level up your Fire VFX game. And if you learned something, then like this video, share this video, and also comment below what video you would like to see next. And also don't forget to check out visualeffectspro.com, where you can see our VFX stock footage packs, and if you want to try them out, you can actually download the free VFX elements that includes one clip from every single pack for completely free. So once you download them, you can just use them for as long as you want. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.